In recent years, there's been significant controversy related to the stock trading activities of members of Congress. Many members of Congress have seen their net worths increase multifold since joining. This increase can't be explained by their $174,000 annual salary alone. In fact, the majority of members of Congress are millionaires. For example, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's family has reportedly made over $100 million from the stock market. Members of Congress often meet with corporate executives and lobbyists who could potentially share non-public information. Furthermore, members of Congress know about new laws being drafted that could impact publicly traded companies and their share prices, so it seems plausible that they could gain an informational advantage. While there is no restriction on the ability of members of Congress to trade stocks, they are required to report all of their trades publicly within 45 days. In recent years, many investors have followed the strategy of copying the trades of congressional leaders, hoping to benefit from their perceived insider knowledge. There are now even ETFs that can do this for you. In this video, we'll take a deep dive into the stock market returns of members of Congress, and try to determine whether or not insider trading is a widespread practice within Washington, D.C. Before we move on, let me tell you about an interesting statistic I recently came across. According to LinkedIn data, the number of job postings mentioning AI has more than doubled over the past 2 years. With the proliferation of generative AI tools, including ChatGPT and others, it's becoming vital to know how to use AI to stay competitive in today's job market. Anybody can tinker around with AI, but to get the best results, you need real skills. I recommend today's video sponsor, Growthschool, which offers a 3-hour workshop on how to effectively leverage AI tools and ChatGPT in your career. It's usually a paid workshop, but they're now offering it for free for the first 1,000 people. If you're working professionally, whether you're in a tech or a non-tech field like sales, marketing, HR, operations, a freelancer, or even an entrepreneur, you need to learn AI skills, which will help you in increasing your income. In this workshop, you'll learn how to grow your career 10x, salary hike strategies, solving complex problems with Excel within 5 minutes, personal branding, and even data analytics. I've attended the workshop and would give it a 5 out of 5 rating. Growth School's already helped over 1 million learners, is backed by top-tier investors, and has been named a top LinkedIn startup for the past 2 years in a row. It's a great opportunity to grow your career or business, so don't forget to register for the free AI and ChatGPT workshop today. It's free for the first 1,000 people only. The link is in the description below. And now back to the video. In 2012, the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act, commonly known as the STOCK Act, was signed into law with the intent of preventing insider trading among members of Congress and their staff. The STOCK Act prohibits the use of non-public information derived from one's official position for personal gain. It also mandates that all stock transactions by members of Congress be publicly disclosed within 45 days. It passed the Senate with 96 votes for and 3 against. One of the 3 senators who voted against the bill was North Carolina Senator Richard Burr. We'll talk more about Senator Burr shortly. While the STOCK Act sounds good on paper, it is proven difficult to enforce. In the 12 years since it was signed into law, not a single member of Congress has ever been prosecuted under the act. When a member of Congress buys or sells a stock, proving their motivations can be challenging. They might have had access to confidential information, but they can also claim their decisions were based on public information. Take the example of the CHIPS Act passed in 2022. This provided tens of billions of dollars of subsidies to various companies in the semiconductor industry. As a member of Congress, you may have been privy to this bill long before it passed, and bought shares of semiconductor stocks in anticipation. But there are dozens of other reasons you might have been bullish on semiconductor stocks. The semiconductor shortage of 2020 and 2021 was widely known to the public. This might have been reason enough to invest in semiconductor stocks. Even an outside observer may have been able to predict that Congress would pass the CHIPS Act ahead of time, just by reading the news and making reasonable assumptions. A member of Congress almost certainly has an advantage by seeing what's going on behind the scenes. Once you already know what's going to happen, it's easy to look back in hindsight and say what publicly available information could have led you to draw the same conclusion. To use an analogy, let's say you had inside information from the Academy Awards, and you knew that Oppenheimer would win Best Picture. You could brag to your friends about how great you are at predicting the awards. You could give a bunch of analysis about the movie to justify why you think it will win. It's theoretically possible that you could have predicted that Oppenheimer would be Best Picture even without your inside information. Thus, it's impossible to disprove your acumen as a film critic. The member of Congress with the most controversial trading history is Richard Burr, who served as a Republican senator from North Carolina between 2005 and 2023. He was a high-ranking senator and served as chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Notably, he was one of the only 3 senators to vote against the STOCK Act in 2012. The first controversy comes in 2018. Richard Burr and his wife owned approximately $50,000 worth of stock in a Dutch fertilizer company called OCI. In September of 2018, Burr and his wife sold their shares in the company. By the end of the year, OCI's share price had fallen by more than 40%. In November of 2018, the Trump administration announced exemptions, which lessened the impact of economic sanctions targeting Iran's energy sector. The sanctions were previously expected to increase prices of various petrochemicals that OCI sells, thereby benefiting OCI. Thus, the exemptions were unfavorable for OCI. As chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Richard Burr may have known about the exemptions ahead of time. However, it's important not to overstate the effect of the sanctions policy. The decline in share price may also be attributed to an unfavorable earnings report also published in November of 2018. There's no reason to believe that Richard Burr would have had any foreknowledge of the earnings report. Burr's most controversial trade came in 2020. In February of 2020, COVID was beginning to spread around the world, but it was not yet obvious what impact this would have on the global economy. At this time, most people were going about their daily lives as if nothing was happening. On February 7th, Richard Burr co-authored an op-ed in Fox News. The op-ed reassured the readers that the US government is better prepared than ever to face the coronavirus thanks to the work of the Senate Health Committee and the Trump administration. Behind the scenes, Burr was much more concerned about the pandemic. The Senate Intelligence Committee, of which Burr was the chair, was receiving daily updates about the virus from US intelligence agencies. On February 13th, Richard Burr sold $263,000 worth of stocks in his and his wife's individual retirement accounts. This represented 95% of their stock holdings. That same day, he had a telephone conversation with his brother-in-law, who subsequently sold $160,000 of his own stocks. Richard Burr also purchased $1.2 million worth of government bonds. An investment in government bonds will often benefit during times of economic recession, as the Federal Reserve often cuts interest rates to support the economy. This is exactly what happened in 2020. During this period, Senator Burr was texting someone about the pandemic. The identity of this individual is redacted in the publicly released version of the FBI's affidavit, but it was presumably a government employee providing non-public information to Mr. Burr in his capacity as a United States Senator. 1 week later, the stock market tanked. According to the FBI, Burr avoided $87,000 of losses and profited by more than $164,000 as a result of his trades. The profits were from the government bonds. Once his trading activity became known to the public, Senator Burr defended himself by saying he relied solely on public news reports. Specifically, he followed CNBC's reporting about the pandemic. The FBI investigated Burr for possible violations of the Stock Act, but ultimately declined to pursue an indictment. The Richard Burr case highlights how difficult it is to prosecute members of Congress under the Stock Act. It's indeed theoretically possible that he could have decided to sell his stocks purely because of what he read on CNBC. But the fact that he sold before the market crashed, by definition, means he was either better informed or had greater investing acumen than the general public. To legislate effectively, members of Congress need to know what's going on in the economy. To this end, various government agencies provide them with a plethora of information, much of which is non-public. This will inevitably give them insights as to how to trade in the stock market. It can be very difficult to draw the line between general knowledge and insider information. Given that members of Congress can trade stocks with near impunity, one might expect them to make heavy use of their informational advantage. If this is indeed the case, you would expect them to generate above-average returns. There are a number of websites which compile the Stock Act trading disclosures of politicians. They don't disclose the exact size of each trade, so we don't know the portfolio weights, but we do know which stocks each politician owns. Trading activity of the politician's immediate family members is also included. Two serving members of Congress with potentially suspicious trading histories are Democratic Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi and Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville. Both have been subject to media articles questioning their trades. I've calculated an index based on Nancy Pelosi's stock trades. Since we don't know the exact amounts of each transaction, I just assume the portfolio is equally weighted. I calculated the average return of each stock that Pelosi owned at any given time to make an index of her stock picks. Also, we're only looking at stocks, not options trades. The equal weighted stock index is not indicative of what returns she actually generated. Based on the limited nature of the Stock Act disclosures, this is not possible to calculate precisely. But if Pelosi indeed has an information advantage, we should see outperformance even in the simple index we created. In the case of Nancy Pelosi, the trades are actually conducted by her husband, Paul Pelosi, instead of Nancy herself. However, since a wife and her husband can easily share information with each other, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Over the past few years, the Pelosi portfolio has indeed outperformed the S&P 500, but not by a huge margin. The Pelosi portfolio is heavily concentrated in mega-cap technology stocks, including Nvidia, Microsoft, Apple, etc. Mega-cap tech has outperformed over the past few years. By itself, this is not proof of insider trading. The Pelosis may have just gotten lucky, choosing to invest in tech stocks at the right time. In the case of Tommy Tuberville, his stock picks actually underperformed the S&P 500 over the past few years. This is not what you'd expect from someone with an information advantage. In 2020, a study was published in the National Bureau of Economic Research, which analyzed the performance of stocks purchased and sold by the US senators between 2012 and 2020. Stocks purchased by senators slightly underperformed stocks in the same industry in size. Stocks sold by senators slightly underperformed in the first 3 months, but outperformed by the 1-year mark. However, this was not statistically significant. They found no evidence that senators have industry-specific stock-picking ability related to their committee assignments. There's almost certainly some cases in which non-public information influences the trading decisions of members of Congress. But as we've seen in the Richard Burr case, it's often too blurry to result in a prosecution. Furthermore, these appear to be isolated incidents. On an aggregate scale, it does not appear that members of Congress benefit significantly from insider information. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about congressional insider trading? Let us know in the comments section below. As always, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Wall Street Millennial, signing out.